Hello, everybody. Mary Rocky here. Welcome back to the Notary Babe Podcast. Today we have a very, very special guest. Her name is Valerie Rivera with Inner Solace Therapy. She's located in Mission, Texas. She is local and virtual. Welcome, Miss Valerie. Thank you so much for being here.
Hi, Mary. It's so good to see you. Finally, we've been talking back and forth on Instagram, so it's always a pleasure to meet people in real life.
Yes. Do you want to quickly just talk a little bit about yourself and what you do?
Yeah, sure. So my name is Valerie Rivera. I'm a licensed clinical social worker in the state of Texas. I provide services to people, like you said, online and in person. Basically, the main population that I work with is women that have experienced childhood experiences that have led to trauma that now have carried over into their adult life. And so that's one population. And the other population is working with couples that are experiencing high conflict in their relationship.
Awesome. So, a few questions. The first one being, what is trauma?
Yeah, trauma is something that I think a lot of people tend to dismiss because they don't recognize that it's really an experience that has created an impact mentally, physically, emotionally, as opposed to thinking about the actual situation. So, for example, we have these things that are called big T's and little T's, right? And the little T doesn't take away any experience that they may have endured because it's not a big T, right? But basically, what a big T is saying is that it's a life-threatening event, right? We want to think about maybe natural disasters, war, abuse, domestic violence. And so anything that has been life-threatening would be considered a big T. But when we think about little T's, it really is about the emotional distress that it causes, right? So we think about bullying, we think about divorce, moving, the death of a pet, the loss of a pet, any type of addiction in the family. These are things that we feel really don't count, right? And not everybody feels this way, but a lot of the times when clients come in and they say, I've never experienced any type of trauma in my life, but I right now I'm not able to function in the way that I know that I can. And as I do the assessment initially, I discover, man, you really have had a lot of things that have occurred in your life in childhood, and it could be something like parents were present, and they provided their basic needs, but they weren't present emotionally because maybe they were too busy working, or maybe because, they had two jobs and they were raised by grandparents or caretakers, right? Um, and so when I think about that and I talk to the clients about what they've experienced, they kind of think back and they say, oh, I didn't realize that that was something traumatic that I went through in my life. So big T's and little T's really are differentiated between the life-threatening situation, but also what causes emotional distress in somebody's life.
Oh, wow. Well, that's a new one. I wasn't very familiar or aware about big T's and little T's, so that's very
Mhm.
informative.
Yeah.
Now, your experience from um, how does trauma affect the mind and the body?
Well, when you think about the mind, right, we think about all of the thoughts that we have in a day, and we average thousands and thousands of thoughts in a day. Now, the experiences that we've had in our life are going to determine whether those thoughts are going to allow us to think positively or think negatively. And by negatively, I mean, how hyper aware are we going to be about our surroundings that then take us into this catastrophizing thinking pattern, right? So if I don't do well, at my job one day, because I've had an off day or I'm feeling sick, then that could essentially lead to I'm going to lose my job. I'm going to not be able to pay my bills. It takes us into this downward spiral. And so mentally, these experiences have a lot to do with how we're going to think about our life, our outlook. When we think about the physical reactions, there's this book called The Body Keeps the Score. And basically, what that means is that our body is a container of all of our experiences. So when I ask my clients, where do you feel that in your body? What part of your body is speaking to you? They're able to, sit for a little bit. A lot of times they say, I don't know. I've never really, had to think about that. But when I teach them how to do that, they then become very aware of like, oh my gosh, like that's why I'm having stomach issues, or that's why my back constantly hurts. That's why my chest always feels heavy, right? Because every part of our body tells a story. Whether it's you're feeling grief, you're feeling angry, you're feeling restricted from saying something that you wanted to say. So it's all interconnected. We just haven't been able to like sit down and think about how our mind and our body are either connected or disconnected. A lot of the times the illnesses that we have in adulthood, even in childhood, right? Childhood, adulthood, is because of all of the stress that our body endures, our mind and our body endures. And our body is not something that should be a container for these stress hormones all the time, right? They're there to protect us when we need it, but the mind doesn't differentiate the mind doesn't differentiate between life threatening or this is just the mind, catastrophizing.
Wow,
We have to teach it how to do that.
interesting. And that's most likely something that you will cover with your patient in the session, and you'll give them tools to process
Yeah,
those.
absolutely. I mean, the slogan for inner solace therapy is mind body connection, mind body wellness, because it is important that when you see a therapist, that they incorporate all parts of us, not just let me, teach you how to reframe the thinking patterns, because then what happens to the body? The body doesn't forget, what's there. So
Right.
it is important that you connect both of those things.
Awesome. Awesome. Okay.
Mhm.
So, next question. How does childhood trauma impact individuals in adulthood? This is a very good question. How does childhood trauma impact individuals in adulthood?
Yeah, there's this study that was done, I think back in the 70s or 80s. It's called the Adverse Childhood Experiences, the ACEs, right? And what that does is it asks you a series of questions. I think it's up to 10 questions. And when you check off some of these things, it gives you an ACE score. So for every one that every check you have, it's 1 point. And so the higher the ACE score, that means the more risk you have to developing these autoimmune diseases, these risks for high hospitalizations,
Wow.
um, behavioral risks, right? Substance use, ending up in the court system. And so that's not for everyone. That is just, a part of what may happen. The other part, though, is basically when you have high functioning adults that are unable to connect mind and body and regulate their internal system. And so, what that means is that we have triggers that are connected to our past experiences. And so, we may not be able to recognize why we have that trigger until, right? Maybe you do some work on your own or you go see a therapist that will help you make those connections. But
Yes.
what happens is that we start to look at the world very differently, right? So I talked about hyper awareness, hyper vigilance, all of the hypers, meaning I am very much aware of my surroundings in a way that leads us to feel unsafe. That's one part of it. The other part is the hypo, meaning I am not aware of what's going on. I'm very much tunnel visioned and I'm very disconnected from my reality or even from myself.
Mm.
So we can still be high functioning, right? I have a lot of clients that are very high functioning. I mean, these people are teachers, lawyers, doctors. They do well for themselves, but they can't sit still, right? It's always like, how can I stay busy? Because the moment that I allow myself to sit with my thoughts, that is what's the scary part for them. And they don't know how to manage that. So all of that comes from past experiences, how you connected with your parents or the people that took care of you, how you received attention or didn't receive attention. Um, so it just depends on what they've gone through in their life that will then determine the outcome of how we function as adults.
Wow. Interesting. Yes. And that's why I recommend books, and books are very important. But getting that one-on-one with your therapist, that's where you're going to get specific catering to what it is that you're suffering with. So I highly recommend that anybody that's been thinking about it, that's just wants information, to reach out to you, to Miss Valerie. That way you guys can talk about the potential, the possibility of working together, because a therapist is ultimately, I would say, in my opinion, the way to go. So yeah, that's all of that. Just you talking about very general information. All of that is just enough for me to reach out to you and find a therapist that would help me with that trauma. Awesome, awesome.
Yes.
So let's go ahead and go on to question number 4. How is therapy helpful for trauma survivors?
You know, like I mentioned, it's about making connections, right? I always like to tell clients that you can come into therapy for one thing and we can work through that one thing. But if you don't work through the experiences that you've had that have essentially created the person that you are, the behaviors that you have, the way that you think, the way that you feel about certain experiences, right? Then it's going to continue to pop up. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but years, down the road. A lot of the clients that I do work with have had childhood experiences and have gotten so far in their life. And now, whether they are mothers or fathers, or they've gotten a new job, or they've moved, or something has happened in their life that now they feel, oh my gosh, like, why is this coming up for me now? Like, I've done so well up until this point. That's what we know are triggers. Triggers are those things that have a connection to your past. And whether we have subconsciously or consciously avoided those experiences, then at some point they will show up again. And so it is important to be able to navigate how we think, how we behave, how we feel, so that our outcome health wise is good, right? And that we don't continue to have these negative interactions with people in our lives.
Right. No, yes. And you're so right about that, because for me, it kind of hit me back late in life. I had to do the work late in life because I was just coasting. I was fine until I came to a situation where I was triggered and everything came out. The past, I started to get memories about past childhood trauma, and it's like it was never ending, I felt like. But no, yes, you're absolutely right about that. And it wasn't until I started to learn about the tools, about the breathing, the journaling, about yoga, and all of that, that was starting to help little by little by little. It's been a 2-year process, but it's been helping.
Yeah, and that's something important. You said 2 very important things. Is one, the breathing, the yoga, the movement of the body. I started doing yoga last year for the first time. I had exercised before, but I had never really done yoga. And yoga is one of those things that is intimate, right? It's intimate because you get to connect with your body in different ways. And there's a lot of research around yoga and trauma. That's actually one of the best ways for the body to start to feel safe again and to feel secure. So I had a lot of emotional connections with myself and with my body. And, there'd be times after class where I'd be crying because I'd be like, oh my gosh, this was such an intimate experience, right? And when you really allow yourself to feel safe and to connect, it provides your body with a sense of regulation, right? A regulation just means that we're able to feel copacetic in our bodies, right? That we're able to say, okay, like I can take care of my body in a way that I want to. So that's one important thing. But the other thing that you mentioned is the amount of time that it takes. A lot of clients will ask, how long is this going to take? How long am I going to have to be in therapy for? And my general answer, which I know they hate, is I don't know. It depends on what comes up, right? Because you may show up to therapy saying, I want to work on this one specific thing. And as we process that, there's going to be another thing and another thing and another thing, right? I asked a question in my intake paperwork, like, how long do you foresee being in therapy for? And I think that's important because it gives me a general understanding of what they think is going to be like a quick fix, right? Sometimes I have clients, sometimes I have clients
A
that say,
lifetime. For me,
Yeah,
lifetime.
yeah, right. Yes, because you go through a series of events throughout your life. And the longest I have a client that I've worked with for, I think this is the longest time that I've worked with a client has been 6 years, I believe. And we're not working on the same things we worked on when she first came in, right? I mean, we did a lot of childhood work with her, a lot. But now this person is at their prime, right? This person got, like, I've been there through all of these experiences that they've gone through, and they're doing well. Now it's just check-ins, right? Monthly check-ins, like, okay, this has been going on. That, I had this trigger that came up, but I was able to regulate. I was able to utilize the skills that we've talked about. So it's not about you're going to be in therapy for a lifetime working on the same thing. That probably would not, be good for the person. It's about being able to learn how to manage the things that are going to show up in your life throughout the rest of your life.
Right, right. No, yes, absolutely agree. Yes, absolutely. And okay, so with that in mind, we'll just go ahead and jump into the last question.
Mhm.
How to start therapy and what is the process?
Yes. Okay. So it's important. I always tell my client, it's important for you to do your research, right? Don't just go with the first therapist that you see. It's hard work to find a therapist. I actually didn't start my therapy journey until about uh I don't know, 2018, I think, right? And it happened because I myself was triggered by a client I was working with. And up until that point, I was like, I'm fine, I'm fine, I'm fine. And then there was something about this client that I was like, I need to start doing my own healing work, right? And it took me about 3 different therapists to find a therapist for me. And I didn't find a therapist, within that same month. I found that it took me 2 years to find my therapist. So do your research, right? Think about why you want to work with a specific therapist and ask if they do consultations. A consultation should be free. Some therapists do, some therapists do not. I do. I provide a free 15-minute telephone consultation because, one, I want to be able to understand what it is that you're coming to me for so that I can make a decision as to whether or not I'm the right fit for you, right? If somebody comes to me for something that I do not specialize in, I'm not going to work with that client because it's not fair to either of us, right? I want to be able to make sure that you are working with somebody that has the skills and the training to help you. So 15-minute consultation, I get to understand what they're coming in for. I tell them a little bit about how I work and the type of therapeutic modalities that I use. And then I answer any questions they may have. I provide them, I'm very transparent about, my fees, all of the things that are necessary for them to make an informed decision. So when you have a consultation, then we make the first appointment if we're ready to go. The first appointment is what we call an assessment. And that assessment is generally me asking questions to understand a variety of dynamics in a person's background, right? In a person's life. So who were you raised by? What was your relationship like with your parents, with siblings? Do you have any children? Your marriage? Like all of these things that give me a real good big picture of how I'm going to essentially create a treatment plan that the client agrees with, right? And says, okay, this is what we're going to work on throughout the time that we are together. And then from there, we go on and we do our therapy sessions together. So it's, I would say it's like an approach that you take that can be ever changing through therapy, right? I tell the clients the intake or the treatment plan is something that is on paper, but it doesn't mean that it's gonna align in that way, because sometimes you're gonna have things that come up in your life and it's gonna be like, oh, okay, we're gonna take like a detour and we're gonna work on this, but then we're gonna go back to what we initially started.
Oh, okay, okay,
Mhm.
interesting. Awesome. And I know that you do have some projects coming up. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so this is something that's going to be launched hopefully by July, but if not August. And what it is a new service that I'm offering. They're called intensives. I have already offered them to a couple of clients that I currently have within my practice, but now this is going to be open to everybody. Intensives for EMDR or trauma work, and intensives for couples work. And so what that means is that I have clients that say, I want to do the work, but I don't know that I can commit to, once a week or every 2 weeks because of schedules or whatever that looks like. Or I want to do the work, but I just want to like get into it. I want to dive in deep. I don't want to have to like go back home and, sit for another week and all of that. Right. So an intensive is going to be a 1, 2, or 3 day program. And it can be more than that, but for right now, it's a 1, 2, or 3 day program where I give you 3 to 4 hours each day that allows us to sit and do intense work. So instead of, waiting for, and this intense work usually takes weeks over, a certain amount of time, right? To get into the depth of where we would essentially be with the intense work. So I'm still going to continue to offer those individual sessions and those couple sessions once a week or every 2 weeks, but the intense work is for, special population that says I'm ready to dive in deep.
Okay, awesome, awesome. And you did mention ED.
EMDR.
Okay, what can you talk a little bit about what that is?
Yeah, EMDR stands, so it's a tongue twister. It's eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. And so I break it down. It is a therapeutic modality that was essentially developed for traumatic experiences, but now can be used for a variety of different things, right? It can be used for anxiety, for grief, for relationships, for all sorts of things. But it is a specialized training that I went through, and what it does is it allows the two parts of the brain, right and left, to be connected with the body. So I have a video on this and we can link it hopefully so that people can kind of understand a little bit more about what that is. But the eye movement is basically a bilateral thing that we connect, right? So two parts of the brain. When we do certain types of modalities, usually only tapping into one part of the brain, which is either the emotional part of the brain or the cognitive part of the brain, but we tend to leave out the body. EMDR does all three. It's cognitive, it's emotions, it's body, it's everything at once, right? And so the desensitization part is we pick something, right? I mean, obviously there's a way to do this, but we essentially pick an event, a situation, an incident in somebody's life, and we identify the triggers, and then we tend to desensitize those triggers so they no longer have the same arousal that they had when you first came in. The reprocessing part is we look at the event, we can talk about the event, and it's not going to have the same impact, right? So we no longer avoid, it's no longer free floating in the brain as it's thinking it's still happening. So that, it's a nice modality to tap into parts of our lives where we don't necessarily have to talk about it. Because EMDR, you don't have to tell me about details of anything. So that's the other thing. With trauma, you shouldn't have to talk about the details of the experience. There are ways to process those experiences without me knowing. There's a lot of times where I don't know, the details of things because it's not necessary.
Wow, wow, awesome. Well, that's amazing information that you've been giving us, and I really do hope that this resonates and that this lands on somebody that's really needing to reach out to you, and they really do take the courage to take that step and reach out to you. And it's somebody that that I've known, that I've talked to, that I've featured, and I really do hope that whoever is listening right now does take that step and reach out to you, Ms. Valerie.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you
Yes,
so much for being here. I really do hope that when you do launch in July, we do come back and talk about it. For any of the other information is going to be listed on the description, social media as well. But you want to share that real quick, Ms. Valerie?
Yeah, so you can find me at Inner Solace Therapy, both on Instagram and on Facebook. And then my website is innersolacetherapy.com. So it's all the same. You just plug it into the internet, you should be able to find me.
Okay, perfect. And with that, we're gonna just wrap it up. Thank you everybody for listening. Do you have any last words, Ms. Valerie?
No, I mean, just, do your research. Definitely take some time to think about what you've experienced in your life that maybe needs work so that you can continue to grow and develop in a way that is feasible for your life, that is necessary for your life.
Perfect. Awesome. Well, thank you so much again. And hopefully we'll talk again soon. And everybody else, thank you so much for listening. Talk to you guys soon.